Hey, welcome everybody to our webinar today. It's Modern Web Experiences, and the focus is on increasing engagement through progressive web applications. Um, I wanted to first introduce myself and then introduce my co-host today. So I'm Brian Marr. I'm the Chief Strategy Officer at Smashing Ideas. Smashing Ideas is a experience design and innovation agency. Our parent company is Luxoft, which is a global IT solutions provider. And with both of our companies, we work with Fortune 500 down to Fortune 50 clients on digital transformation across business models, products, and services. I think, as part of my role, I'm often advising our clients on which platforms and which technologies we should be focused on, and which ones are important as maybe trends that are potentially short-term things and trends that are going to have a lasting and long-term impact on their business. And I had the opportunity to meet my co-host today, Cheney, almost a year ago, and for me it was sort of I don't know, it was like a transformative meeting because the way he described what was possible on the web then, that things that I didn't even know were taking place, and then what was going to be possible in the future, it really proved to me that we have some pretty amazing opportunities to increase our engagement and customer experience using modern web technologies. And so I'm really excited about this webinar. Excited to explain to you why we're interested and passionate about progressive web applications and just sort of the modern web in general as a platform for engagement. And super excited to hear from Cheney from Google on his thoughts on where this is all headed. So Cheney, if you can introduce yourself, that would be great. I think you might need
All right. Well, yeah, I'm unmuted, but
all right.
Hey everyone, my name is Cheney. Like Brian said, I work at Google as a solutions consultant. And what that means is I get to work with some of our most strategic partners in helping them think about how they can take advantage about all these new technologies on the web and how to evolve their product thinking to help users actually understand what value that actually brings. As part of this, I work very closely with the Chrome team, the search team, amongst others at Google, to kind of think about, well, where do we want the web to evolve to? I mean, we make our business obviously connecting people with the highest quality web experiences possible. And obviously then we rely on the entire web ecosystem and all the companies, developers, designers, to know what they can do with the web to make that high quality experience. So we'll talk a little bit about that in a little bit.
That's great. So as far as our agenda for today goes, we're going to introduce what is this all about, talk about some of the challenges today that we're facing with engagement on with just sort of like standard websites as well as native mobile applications. Talk about the modern web and what it enables for us and why it's important for Smashing as well as Google. And we just touched on that just briefly there, but we'll go into a lot more depth on it. How you can use a progressive web app to improve customer experience. And Cheney has some great examples of some really big companies that have already made the leap and are seeing great results out of that. And then our goal is to leave some time for Q&A. And just based on some of the attendees that I saw, we have a wide range of sort of interests on the list, which is great. And so everyone from a business standpoint to a technical standpoint. And so we're going to do our best to address between the two of us. And I think especially as we get into the more technical questions, I'm going to lean on my co-host a little bit more for those, and and I can talk a little bit about why I think both of us can talk a little bit about where we think the business and engagement opportunities are. So with that, let's jump into what we're seeing happening today. So I think if you look at where we've been over the years, our company made a really big shift to mobile many years ago, right as some of the first feature phones were released in building native applications on iOS and Android. And the opportunities that both of those platforms provide is building high quality, engaging applications using a pretty great tool set to deliver that engagement. The challenge is that you are kind of locked into an ecosystem, or in some cases an app store, and you're sort of beholden to the fees that are required around that. So like with Apple as an example, 30% of your anything that you earn through there is paid to Apple. We lose people as we transition them from a website to go and download the application. So there's kind of an extra step along the way. Also, there's a discovery issue within the App Store itself, and a lot of people are browser first these days. They're looking for a URL first. There's some really interesting stats that are up on screen there that that we're seeing is, number one, I was thinking about my own behavior just as I was preparing for this. I don't remember the last time I actually downloaded an app. There was one, I think, like a month and a half ago or something like that was maybe my most recent memory. But there's a period of time that people go through sort of like this app fever and they download a bunch of stuff to their phones, and then there's a bunch that don't get used, and so abandonment rates of the applications is quite high. And then there's a bunch that that you do use kind of on a daily basis, but as far as new applications go, there are less and less that are kind of being integrated into our repertoire. So we're a lot of times just as users really URL focused and look, browser first. When you when we look at the application, or sorry, the browser options that are out there, responsive websites are great, and it provides a really great experience on a mobile phone, but it does leave a lot of opportunity on the table, especially when it comes to kind of re-engaging users or getting them to complete a transaction with the shopping cart. There's a lot of people that will do transactions through a native application, but maybe not complete it through a website. So we're seeing some interesting statistics around that, and I think Google has obviously recognized those as well and built the technologies that allow us to kind of improve upon those. For us, progressive web apps solve a variety of issues, and it's not a silver bullet, if you will. It's not like the one thing that can fix everything at the moment, but it certainly is in some particular industries and for some types of applications. The benefits cover a lot of different areas. So, one of them is building it once for all platforms. So rather than building an iOS version and an Android version, which is a lot of times double the cost, now we're building once for a progressive web application. You install it without a without an app store. So you can install it just like a native application to the home screen of your phone. You don't have to. You can still get the benefits out of that without doing it, but it does kind of take out that whole kind of intermediary and the time required to do that. Push notifications, huge for driving repeat engagement and return visitors and getting them to complete transactions that you want to do. We talk a lot about motivational user experience design, which is something that we focus on, or motivational user experience. And it's a great tool for us to create that re-engagement and create those habit loops that we look for out of end users to complete those transactions and drive additional revenue or completions. You get a beautiful experience. What we can do now on the web is in most cases equivalent to what we can do in a native application, which is amazing. And that has not always been the case. We'd always look to native apps for a higher polished experience, and with what we can do today with PWA, it's in most cases completely equivalent. Small file sizes, so we're making the apps that we build today, since they're all designed to like sit on a phone and have all of the parts that load fast and are not making calls to a server. Those are big applications. They take up a lot of space on your phone, and PWAs do not. And then I think the final thing is around the ability to enter new markets that maybe have lower bandwidth connections. And so there's some really great examples that Cheney has around a couple of different companies. And I won't spoil the surprise on those, but those are they're finding some great gains in producing these lower bandwidth PWAs in their markets. So as I mentioned, these are big companies that are doing it. You have Twitter Lite, Lancome, Alibaba. And this is not an exhaustive list. You have Uber, Starbucks, West Elm, Pinterest, et cetera, have all benefited from PWA. And these are some of the gains that these guys have seen based on the case studies that we've looked at. Overall, if you look at averages, there's great averages across what we look at as the key measures for engagement. So number one, just customer engagement. So increasing mobile sessions, pages, time per session, et cetera. Increasing recovered shopping carts. And so 8% increase on recovered shopping carts is a lot of revenue. So being able to push notifications, make the products easier to install, make them easier to buy. There's upside there. More sales through mobile. So key driver that we look for as well is a lot of people in the past were completing transactions, they're browsing on a mobile site and then going to the website to complete the transaction. We don't want that gap in between that experience. We want them to complete the transaction right away. And so being able to do that via PWA is great. And then the last thing is, if you have one thing that you're building for, and you're building it for the web, development and maintenance costs are significantly lower. So by consolidating that and consolidating your iOS and Android builds, even potentially through a PWA, you have a lot of opportunity to decrease your overall costs. So from our standpoint, we have customers that we build iOS and Android products for, applications, and they're often they're always looking for two things: how do we increase engagement, and with that, it's like sales and completions and et cetera. And then also, how do we decrease our costs and decrease ongoing costs for the product, because we need to make revenue with it. And the reason that we are excited at Smashing about progressive web apps is that it really does provide a nice way to do that on one, using one consolidated system that provides significant benefits, especially for certain types of customers. And so retail, the travel industry, we've seen, we talked, I think Cheney and I were talking just the other day about ephemeral applications. So things that are designed to have a sort of a one-time use and then go away, whether it's ticketing or an event, or, maybe a trip that you're on or something like that, all really great uses for this. So with that, and as an aside, I think we do have a Q&A opportunity to provide questions. So use that Q&A module within Zoom here, and we'll do our best to get to those questions over time. So I think the best thing to do now is hand it over to Cheney and have him really explain what these things are all about, since he knows it far better than I do.
All right, thank you, Brian. So again, I'm just going to do a quick rehash of maybe what Brian quickly covered. I do work on a lot more of the web than progressive web apps, but I did want this to be more about progressive web apps, and hopefully the question can reflect that a little bit. There's a couple of tenets here I want to kind of put out there kind of as a whole of what does this actually mean, right? Like why are we doing this? And these are user first, higher quality, and more engaging. User first is, think a lot of times as web developers, we oftentimes think of developer productivity. We create pages where we're thinking about creating isolated pages as opposed to like experiences, like what's the use case that the user's coming in from, what's the form, what's the device, what's the platform, what's the time of day. We actually don't spend a lot of time optimizing our experiences thinking about that. In many cases, we talk about mobile responsive, and in those situations, those aren't actually mobile friendly user first journeys, because all you're doing is taking a 3-column website, making it 1 column and saying, hey, it works on mobile. That's not actually user first, because for a user first application, you're actually thinking about what are people used to when they're using the highest quality user interfaces on the phone? What expectations of what this user interface, this product can do can be like that. And also quality, right? I think a lot of times the web, as we've used it, we've all had the moments where, why is this touch target too small? Why is the screen flickering? Why does nothing actually respond to my touch input, right? The quality just isn't there right now. And then so if you design your websites and you create your websites like a glorified poster in many cases, you're not going to get the engagement. It's going to be very much like a poster. People are going to look at it and they're just going to leave. And so the trend of progressive web apps, we want to enable developers, companies to figure out how can you create these more engaging experiences so users actually stay on your site and feel like it's an experience that is worth installing, worth keeping, and worth coming back to. And I think this is something that, not to beat a dead horse here, is that the web is something that's unintuitively the most powerful platform out there, right? It's the one platform that reaches all of your users. We often get caught up in new technologies like VR, AR, all these different things, and a lot of these technologies are actually bootstrap themselves out of web content. We talk a lot about like Google Assistant, right? And then Google Assistant is reading news articles. It's reading, like music and things like that based upon structured data you put into your website. It's actually the underlying platform that people forget kind of powers all these things. And we don't spend enough time investing in kind of the experiences people actually get when they get there, right? How many people actually go to your site directly versus coming in from a referral through social, through a search engine or something like that. even inside native app from like a Facebook web view or something, you're probably landing on your brand. Their first impression is going to be your website. And so you need that first impression to be as high quality as possible. It doesn't make any sense for them to wait before getting the real experience of your site when you very well have the technologies and APIs at hand to give that to them at that moment of entry. So to jump to the chase, I mean, let's quickly talk about the Starbucks Progress web app. So Dave is in Seattle. He actually talked about this at Chrome Dev Summit, and Starbucks actually found unintuitively to some of their leadership that they talk a lot about iOS and Android being like clearly a huge brand in their vertical, yet their website actually reached more monthly active users a month than any of the other platforms. Before they started the PWA journey, it's, well, we have all these users coming in here. This is our highest mode of growth, yet we're not giving them the experience that they're expecting when they're coming in. People expect to come to Starbucks and immediately have access to everything, immediately be able to use a user interface like all the other user interfaces on your phone on this device, right? From a website and an application, we're not here to really talk about what technologies are better at the end of the day, but in a user-first approach, if I'm somewhere in line, maybe at Target, and I'm thinking about going to Starbucks, and I'm using this phone, right? My mentality is the same. The way I use it with like a thumb-first approach is probably the same, and the expectations of what I use in the UI is probably the same. So I think this is really powerful to kind of think about, and we'll dive into kind of how Starbucks is actually engaging into this in a little bit. So at the end of the day, though, going back to quality, websites traditionally just have been kind of slow, right? We design page first. You might use React, which is an application platform, but you're not actually creating applications on the web. You're actually booting up React on one page. When you navigate to another URL, you're probably unloading the page, reloading the page. You get that flash of white. And if you don't get that flash of white, your page just kind of hangs there for like 2 seconds. It feels like every interaction that you do, there's just like a slight delay. You're maybe dragging something across the screen or scrolling a carousel. It's not quite tracking with your finger. Right, so you could actually get to a world where your mobile website user interface and design looks a lot like your native application. You say, well, why are people engaging more with that native application? It actually goes down to quality. At the end of the day, a lot of times the website isn't implemented in a way where it's the way things load in, things move around, and it's really confusing to the user. You're trying to click on one link for an item that you're interested in, but something moves around and you're clicking something else instead. And because pages load slowly, now you have to wait for the browser to load the next page, click back to reload this page, and it's just a really broken experience. And so you can't get into this uncanny valley of, oh, it looks like it should be mobile first, but it's really not. And then there's this expectation where, from a web standpoint, why do we create experiences that only live on the web and not on the device? I think users have a lot of expectations that your user interface as a brand, if I have a relationship with you on this device, you should be right here instead of on the web. But when you're on the subway or your internet connection is moving from 4G to 3G, your effective connection is pretty slow, things break. The page doesn't, kind of the UI just kind of breaks down. How can we solve that? And I think that from a progressive web app, we actually make that possible so that you as a brand, instead of just having your content live on some server somewhere and having users go that far to fetch it every single time, you could actually keep your core user interface loaded on the device. So the user actually feels like as a brand, you are there as an assistant ready for you to power those further user journeys, regardless of network connectivity. So unfortunately though, going back to the technology agnostic, users don't actually ideally care about whether you're a website or you're an app, right? They're comparing your experience to the best experience out there, regardless of what platform it is made out of, right? It could be the Airbnb native app, the Spotify native app, the form functions that they use there, how sidebars behave, where listings are located, functions like being able to save offline, being able to access, if I was an airline, being able to see my boarding pass regardless of where it is, right? These kind of expectations are going to be expected regardless of what technology you use to build it. So part of our challenge at Google is to make it possible for users and developers to actually create those experiences that reflect these expectations. And so you don't have to feel like, well, it's not working out, so let's just throw this interstitial up there and say, please, we deliberately made our website poor, or not deliberately, but you can't do this, so you should go to the Play Store or the App Store to download our native application. Our argument is saying that you don't have to do that. You could actually just, if you think about it, most native apps, it's pulling some data from the server, showing some sort of list view, and allowing you to convert. You're not actually doing a lot of things that you need a native app to actually create. And so the idea here isn't to replace your native app. It's that most native app functionality actually isn't unique to the native app platform. It isn't unique to native code. You should just raise the bar of all your different experiences, and Progressive Web Apps wants to help you get there. So the idea here is instant loading experiences for everyone. But it's not just that. We spent a lot of years, if you pay attention to kind of Google material over the past couple of years about loading your pages fast. But it's not just that. It's not just having your page load fast and going from 5 seconds to 2 seconds and be done with it. It's instant for everything. And what we want to get at with Progressive Web App is every single user interaction needs to respond immediately to the user. So page load, clicking filter, clicking sort, switching tabs, jumping to a different page. The expectation that users have, unfortunately, from a lot of the native app usage is that view update where you're switching from one screen to a different screen is going to happen within 100 milliseconds. And so if you approach this from a traditional website development standpoint, you potentially can't get there because you have a page loading another page. You have to go to the server every single time. Just making that server round trip to even begin the data transfer is potentially already 200 milliseconds. And from a human perception standpoint, after 100 milliseconds, we start to perceive that there might be a delay. And so at the end of the day, if you want instant, you want intuitive, you want helpful, and you want capable experiences for everyone. So it's not just about loading fast, it's about staying fast throughout everything. And the promise is that if you can stay fast for every single user interaction through your end-to-end experience, then it's not that much different from a native application at all in terms of engagement, those kind of metrics we often talk about, well, users convert more, et cetera, et cetera. And we have a lot of examples kind of backing that up. And so the idea here is, web is already the most powerful platform when it comes to reach, right? Users come here simply because it's the easiest way to access your brand, but the engagement isn't quite as there. The promise is that if you can create a progressive web app that persists, that has that reliability, that allows you to create a more personal relationship with your customers, users will stay and engage more with every kind of website out there and basically build this kind of parity with the native app ecosystem. So that's a progressive web app, quick kind of 10-minute explanation. Build experiences worth keeping and sticking around for, right? And so to go a little bit deeper, we did actually some research in 2017, kind of asking actual users, going back to user-first approach. Well, why apps? When do you use apps? And why websites? What are, I guess, the positives and negatives of both of these things? And they often say that, well, apps, there's streamlined UX. It seems to be tailored to me. And, I get to sign in. I click it on the home screen, and it kind of remembers what I did last time. And it's faster to invoke because a lot of stuff is already downloaded on the screen, the important things. And then you ask them also, but why do you still use websites? Well, a lot of times it's useful for exploring. There's just more content, more data out there. You get a lot of things where you don't even know about the things you don't know because you get linked to something from social. You discover this new cool brand. You're on Instagram looking at a story. You swipe up to some. I'm not gonna select one brand over another, but you're now on that brand website and answer specific queries because. If you think about it, the Play Store, the App Store is like a domain-first web, right? And so every node you go to is like just the core domain. There's actually no core use case tied to it. But the kind of web is more like a intent-based web. Like the leaf nodes are not necessarily like the core domain. It's actually the content. And so you actually get a better match of intent with web content than a lot of times with the native app content. So it answers specific queries there. And then no downloads needed, right? It's a friction point. I don't need to wait 5 minutes for something to install when I don't even know why I'm going there in the first place. It's great for first impressions. But if you look at this, though, nothing here actually takes advantage of native app capabilities, right? And I'm not saying build one or the other, but it's what if you could have both, right? All these different things could exist in one experience inside a progressive web app. So you get the best of native applications and the distribution of the web all in one so that you've reduced the amount of steps and friction needed for users to get to the value that you're offering as a brand. And so I love this XKCD comic, right? It says, it's an epiphany of sorts, right? Installing things have gone so fast and painless. Why don't we just skip it entirely? Make it a phone that has every app installed already and just downloads and runs on the fly so you as a user doesn't have to manage the app installation process. It sounds magical. And then you realize that's actually web pages, right? So the infrastructure is there. We just have to get to the point where it's easy to create those experiences on this network of web pages. And so we think that what you want to create is essentially progressive web apps. And of course, not every website out there needs to be an app, of course, but progressive web apps for the use cases that really need deeper engagement, that needs a conversation with users. So e-commerce is a great example for this, right? Like an end-to-end use case for e-commerce requires you to, how many taps or swipes does a user need to do for you to feel like you delivered value to the user? Probably quite a bit. And so this is actually a perfect use case for that. So it's about giving users the best experience wherever they're at that also meets expectations of the form factor. I mean, and going back to the design piece, a lot of times I see, brands that has an app and it has a website, and on the website, the mobile website looks like one design, the app looks like another design, and I'm like, the user uses this on the same phone in the same place, right? Some just happen to have the app installed. Why are they different? I assume you've done research as to which actually matches your brand quality, which one converts better, but they're different for some reasons. But the app tends to have more consistency because there's enforcement a lot of times in the Play Store saying you should follow the material design guidelines. On the App Store, you should follow the human interface guidelines of like minimum tap target. This is how the normal behavior of a sidebar should be. But and as web developers, sometimes we make up our own behaviors, right? Oh no, we're going to make up our own behavior of the sidebar. I think some of this is also like innovate where in areas that set you apart, rely on behaviors that users already learned. And so that's another good part about the PWA piece is, you can create very app-like user interfaces with the bottom navigation, the sidebar that you can just swipe away. If you don't do those, users will get confused. It's not that it's a bad thing, it's that they're spending mental energy thinking about, well, how does it actually work? It's mental energy that could have been spent instead thinking about, well, why is this brand offering value to me? So it's important to think about if users are already used to a form factor and a design behavior on native apps on a mobile phone, maybe you can recreate that on the web. And it's actually really interesting because as an anecdote, from the material design standpoint, a lot of our internal teams at Google, we do our prototyping on the web. We actually create all the native app kind of behaviors and affordances on using web technology first before we pour it over. And it shows that you can actually recreate all these things already using web technology. So let's jump to Spotify, because I think this is a point where a lot of people ask, well, why do we need apps? Or we don't want to cannibalize our app traffic or something like that. So Spotify actually recently did a journey into kind of building a progressive web app. It's pretty early days for them, but they basically had no web presence, right, outside for mobile. They obviously had their web player on desktop, but on mobile, it was entirely a native app. But they had a ton of people who couldn't actually play songs because they were blocked by that kind of app download barrier. And so they actually created a mobile website that was progressive web app that will allow you to take advantage of distribution of the web, land on a song, and immediately play in a UI that's identical to the native application any song that was available in the Spotify library. It dramatically increased the amount of daily active users because now you're just lowering barriers. It actually encouraged people to go on to download the native application. And it just simply says, regardless of which way you come into our experience, right? So the Play Store landing on Spotify, through Google Search landing on Spotify, or directly accessing Spotify through a browser, you're getting that baseline experience that actually uses the design patterns of that device. And I think that's really, really powerful. This experience it's consistent as you're moving around outside, going from in and out of your subway, you can still play back the song. And it's really reliable and independent of any of your network condition. And it's fast in the sense that this was particularly developed for emerging markets, developing countries, or users that might even have lower end phones that simply might not be able to download a native application because of storage space, because of device minimum requirements for things like that. So this actually allows the brand to actually be more inclusive in general, which is kind of pretty exciting. So progressive web app user interface shouldn't feel like they're completely different beasts, right? They shouldn't feel like they're blocked on user navigations. And this is this like core tenet that is a huge differentiator for websites and native applications. So without going into the specifics about how a progressive web app might be able to solve for this, hint, it's like using caching, storing things on the device, amongst other things. A key differentiator from a good a good app experience, native app experience in websites is that on native apps, when you're moving from screen to screen, it doesn't feel like it's blocked. It's very consistent that when you swipe right, maybe the dynamic data hasn't loaded in yet because you are on a slow connection, but moving from screen to screen, navigation is always consistent. Right, it has that 100 millisecond boom, a new UI is on the screen. Web traditionally doesn't have this. A traditional website, a responsive site or something like that, you click on something and going from step A to step B to step C, it feels like it's just it could be fast, it could be medium, it could be slow. It's really inconsistent. And that is a mental cost. As a user, I've developed this subconscious expectation that there is a cost to everything I am touching on your site. And if I develop this expectation, what am I going to do? Suddenly I'm being very precise. What do I actually want to click on, right? You don't actually get to create what I call a playful user interface that encourages users to kind of move back and forth and kind of navigate without any kind of effort. You can imagine, you don't want a search results page with 6 items where users have to think very carefully, which one do I actually want to click on, because I have to wait for this entire page to load. It should be almost instant, moving back and forth between search results, item page, back over to actually be able to compare. Because without that, you can never recreate and get parity with desktop shopping, right? And on desktop, what the way users get around that is, well, let's just shift click or command click, something like that, and click on a bunch of things, and now a bunch of tabs open. And then you can tab around and quickly compare, toggle with that. Well, you obviously don't have that form factor on mobile, so how can you create, reduce the amount of barriers in user navigations so that comparing is possible on a mobile device? And so I like to use this kind of analogy out there, right? It's like, what kind of doors are in between your different pages or of your applications? If you're creating like a multi-page application where you're shipping a lot of code, having really, really slow slides for every single URL on your page, it's as if every single room in your house is like this locked door on the left, right? And that's pretty difficult. For example, a couple of weeks ago, Thanksgiving, if you had your turkey going to your dining room, and you have to get through this locked door, it's probably pretty difficult. You probably give up. It's just frustrating or things like that. Instead, you might actually want navigations that are more open. You can kind of see what's on the other side. You can move back and forth easily. And so progressive web apps allow you, because you can actually store the most important user interfaces, the raw data that you need to actually power the next navigation on your device. You don't have to go to the network, which is unreliable, before you can show a user interface for that next navigation. And so the core technology is where we get slightly technical, is Service Worker. So Service Worker is kind of like something that web developers have been really excited about for the last couple of years. It allows you to control network requests. And then as network requests come in, you can actually save components of that onto your phone. Traditionally, if I navigate to, from abc.com/A to abc.com/B, I always have to go to the network to grab, the b.html. With a service worker, it can actually do a couple of things. It can do one, it's like, oh, you've been to b.html before. I actually kept a copy right here on my phone, right? And I kept the critical resources for you to actually load that. So I'm just going to give that to you from a browser perspective, so you can immediately update the user interface, immediately maybe load in some of the old data, and maybe even like pull in the new version in the background. So then you start to kind of do things in parallel. You always keep things up to date, but you always show something as quickly as possible. You can also do more exciting things, where, oh, I actually can't reach that server. The service worker jumps in and says, oh, like a native app, it's kind of like how you install web APK, a normal APK for an Android application, and that has all like the core UI for your application. Service worker can do the same thing. It says, okay, you're offline, you can't reach your that server, but that's okay. I have a version of your brand on this device right now, and I can just show that user interface, right? And so maybe the user, all they want to do is just kind of quickly look at what they were looking at before, quickly verify their boarding pass. They're at the airport because they're traveling internationally with no data plan. Maybe they just want to quickly see that, oh, here is the airport map or something like that, and that could be really powerful because it continues a conversation. Yeah, it's a difference from having a conversation with someone over the phone while you're in the subway, you keep disconnecting, you have to keep redialing, versus having them on the subway with you, having a conversation. It completely changes the dynamic of the friendship between you and your users. And so this allows you to power that. And so Lyft right here is actually an example of someone which built their native app experience, the native app flow, as a progressive web app that's accessible from a URL. And that's actually really powerful way for them to extend to users who simply, if you're bought into and using one rideshare service already, it's probably really hard for you to pay the cost of downloading another one. But in this case, it actually evens up the playing field because you can actually compete with the native app incumbents, your competitors that might have the app already installed. You can compete with them by delivering the same high quality experience, but through a much lower friction channel like the web. And so, this primitive allows you to do a lot of different things, right? There's different patterns around, okay, maybe we can separate out our static user interface and our dynamic content. And so one type of progressive web leverages what we call the app shell, which is, we'll just, like a native application, install your web UI on your device. So what we call the shell, and then the user interface then just pulls in the dynamic data, product details, search results as needed. And the cool thing is, normally when you reload a page or navigate from page to page, you're essentially going to the network to pull in like 100 files, right? And do you really need 100 files to load every single page in your navigation flow? Probably not. The most important thing is, if I'm going from a search, I just need that search results, data. And so let's use the UI that's already saved on my device, and all I need to do is go to the network to pull that one kind of set of data. And then so you can get much more performant experiences doing something like that. And so these are just kind of some of the benefits of using some of the application shell, keeping things kind of different, and using data more economically. So then there you go. Oh, so then what if you can't do, you can't easily separate your UI and your dynamic data? Well, something eBay is looking into. They're actually starting desktop first with this, which is, well, with a service worker, you can do a lot of different things, right? You can actually communicate with the service worker saying, well, the user is on the search results page. You're probably going to click one of these top 3, items. Normally, when the user clicks on those items, the user has to go to the server, grab the item page, and then realize, okay, there's CSS and JavaScript that's new for the item page. It's going to be really, really slow. But since you as a website could already potentially guess what the user is going to click on next, you can use a service worker to actually prefetch and load into the phone's cache that HTML for that item, the image, powering the hero image for that item, so that when the user does click through from the search results page, you can immediately paint at least the above the fold content for that next view, and you can kind of bootstrap this instant navigation without necessarily completely changing the architecture of your site. So there are different ways to kind of use this interesting primitive here. So then going back to the Starbucks kind of progressive web app here, what does a full progressive web app experience look like? So you can also check this out right now, app.starbucks.com, or you can just do a search. It'll load in the browser. But a lot of things that they did here is that they optimized so that no matter what your network connection is, it's going to be less code. It's going to load fast. It takes advantage of service worker, works offline. There's image optimizations in place, so you want to get the basics right. You can add progressive web app features like add to home screen, push notifications, but if your initial code is like 6 megabytes, you're not that different from a native app download, right? And so you still want to get that basic right about loading fast and being performant for every single user interaction. But then they also added different things. They use the same design library for their desktop, their native apps, their progressive web apps, because again, it doesn't make sense to reinvent the wheel for different platforms. And then they added things like add to home screen, parity, credential management API, so that users can immediately be logged in. So again, to go back to the whole user research from earlier, where users feel like a good native app has a connection with them. In this case, well, your website could also have a very active personalization, acknowledging that there is a relationship between you as a user and that brand. And they take advantage of motions and navigations so that users can think about how to navigate around the entirety of Starbucks, even though they are only seeing a small part of the user interface on a mobile viewport. And so we thought that was pretty interesting, and this has been pretty successful for them, right? They're seeing 2 times faster kind of interactive time, the ability for them to actually start interacting with any part of the Starbucks website. They're seeing a huge increase, 65% increase in registrations for a deeper relationship with Starbucks, for reward sign up. And that's what we want to do. We want to move users away from window shopping on the web to actually wanting a direct relationship with you as a brand. And they're able to achieve that deeper engagement because of the migration to the progressive web app platform. And of course, the last piece here is that, to Brian's point earlier, the progressive web apps aren't a mobile-only thing, right? It's something that code can be used for desktop, for a bunch of different platforms. And so I think there's a lot of ways you can kind of have operational efficiency doing that. So that's my talk. At least it's about 20 minutes for questions. This is pretty high overview. So we'll see what we have there.
I think let's see. I'll start with one. I was tempted to jump in there on a couple of things because there were I think moments where when you first ran through a similar version of this presentation with me, it was that moment when I first loaded the I think maybe it was West Elm site or something like that, where you actually see it and feel the experience, and you can feel how fast it loads and see how quickly the pages or the navigation paints, and then feel the interaction that does. I think we're probably going to stop saying app-like pretty soon. At some point, it'll just be, I don't know, mobile-like or something like that, because the capabilities will be the same across. But the work that was done on the Starbucks PWA is phenomenal. So I think one of the things that has come up as a question with some of our customers is maybe some of the best examples for industries that would benefit the most from progressive web apps. And you touched on a couple: retail, hospitality. If you could maybe give an example of the types of things that those industries are doing that allow benefit. So retail, easy. There's things around, the ones that I know about, being able to do push notifications and do re-engagement activities. Obviously, that requires great design and user experience planning and all that kind of stuff. But then the capabilities of the technology now allowing you to do that and create re-engagement, that ability to sort and filter and kind of seamlessly interact with the content. What are some of the other things in each of those industries that kind of are creating those benefits, would you say?
Yeah. So I think in retail, a lot of times there are sites out there that do like affiliate marketing, right? And so they get their main business model is connecting you to other brands. And that's something where offline is extremely important, because what happens if you have poor connectivity is, you're clicking from, some site to a different place to actually purchase. And so I'm thinking like there's like a kayak or something like that where you're connecting to actual airlines. Your connectivity drops, right? And everything breaks because you now don't get credit for that referral. But from a progressive web app world, because you actually have code living offline on your device regardless of network connection, you can actually say, oh, well, the network's not working right now. We can do a couple of things. We can just do a timeout to basically retry this connection so that you still get credit. Or, again, to your point, get a push notification later on saying, hey, do you still want to visit this? And right, it doesn't have to be a referral at that point too, because a push notification is essentially your mechanism of saving your abandoned cart from an e-commerce standpoint. Right now, we think about it, abandoned carts are really roundabout. We go through, we have to ask for their email, right? We then send them an email, and then they have to check the email and then come back to the website. Well, can we reduce the amount of steps there so that at purchase, maybe because they left at the cart, or maybe because they're waiting for like a deal or something like that, they just added in the standpoint. That's a great point to ask them for push access, right? And at that point, regardless of where they are on the phone, they now have a very good reason of coming back to your site and connecting the dots here. Because with every single step you add in between, research shows you have a 20% drop off, right? And so you want to make things as efficient as possible to re-engage the user.
Yeah, that's great. I think one of the areas that we were looking at, I mentioned ephemeral apps, right as we were doing the lead in, and things like ticketing and providing context around an event, and you have your tickets, you have maps of the venue, you've got a bunch of stuff that might only last for that evening or a set of days around, and then it's like, okay, we're done with that now, we can put it away. Or it could be a visit to a hospital, or something like that. There's things that are kind of like moments in time that you don't necessarily want to install an entire application, a native app for, but you do want access to that content and that information over a discrete period of time. And that seems like a pretty great use as well.
Yeah, like we've done user research where it's like really inefficient. You have users who install an app and then they use that for like a week. Or if it's like a extended retail purchase journey where they're shopping for a month, they'll keep it and then they'll get rid of it. Well, that seems really inefficient, right? Or many times when I'm like speaking at a conference or something like that, as you know, conferences, you get a lot of people all on the same cell tower. Your internet connection actually, is probably really bad, right? And then you're like, oh, there was a conference app. I'm going to try to download it, but my internet connection doesn't get up to actually download it because it's like 70 megabytes.
And you're indoors, and yeah,
and this doesn't make any sense, because what if in that conference, you're already getting an email already, right, for your conference registration, that URL in the email could just go straight to the Progressive Web App. And
Yep.
that's amazing because the Progressive Web App is ephemeral. It lasts for as long as you want to, and it goes away, right? And I think there's a world where maybe we're too caught up in having to be on the home screen, right?
Mm-hmm.
But for now, make the cost of being on your home screen as low as possible. So if you are a Progressive Web App from a Chrome perspective, we're looking into ways of saying from the URL bar to say, hey, do you want to install this directly on your home screen, or do you want to promote this to a full screen experience, right? And so you can do these ways of like more seamlessly moving people from one UI to a different UI. I forgot one thing to mention earlier. The thing about at the home screen too is that you can, as a web developer, you can actually add your own install button. So what Spotify actually does is for their Chrome OS PWA is actually they have an explicit install button that shows up once they have a heuristic determining that users are likely to click on it. At that point, you just can engage, and it gets installed to the app drawer on your desktop or your phone. This is pretty neat.
Cool. Wow, that's great. Looks like we have some questions that came in here. The first one was, do we have any kinds of resources that would allow someone to make the jump from Android development to WPA development? I know our developers got a lot of good information from you guys, or from a developer site. Maybe that's a link that we could provide here.
Yeah, so our developer site is definitely a great place to start. I think one of the new sites we launched at Chrome Dev Summit was web.dev, so web.dev. That's probably the shortest URL I can quote right now. That's going to have a lot more content kind of in the coming months. The idea being, let's go with use cases and have little code samples that can kind of go with that. Other than that, though, I think we have a lot of success of Android developers creating progressive web apps, because I think some of our best progressive web apps, like WeGo over in Asia, was actually created by an Android developer. And it actually works because a lot of times native developers, they're already thinking in terms of experience design, not page design necessarily, right? They're thinking about how we can use component-based approaches. And so I think it works really well there.
That's great. I know our developers had especially people that were already doing front-end web development, as well as some of our Android developers, had a really easy transition over to doing some of the proof of concept work that we've been doing. Let's see. So, I posted web.dev there for everybody in the chat. The second question was, the presentation went really fast, which someone liked, and considering the content, are there examples, links, etc., to recap, rehash what was presented? If not, links to libraries that support PWA, and then they followed up and said, oh, we just saw the appsco.pe for the examples. I think one thing is we will post this webinar so that you can review it if you'd like to. I think Cheney and I both speak quickly, so I know there may be some international viewers that wanted to go back and maybe listen to us at 0.5x speed, but then in addition to that, I do believe that Cheney and team have some resources out there that are other, like actually the presentation that you just gave recently was a great one for retail.
What we can do is we can share back out some links if that's like a channel through Brian, and then you can always find me on Twitter. I think it's just like the name is just my full name here, and if the question's specific, I'll try to just answer it directly there too.
Yeah, why don't, as the follow-up email that we send out, I'll make sure we include a couple of links in that for anybody that was registered for this. And then another question was, are most people replacing their home pages with PWAs, or do they live in a separate URL or subdomain? And how do you think about making that decision?
I think it depends. I see people who essentially just say like justfly.com. They're just they're adaptive. Sorry, not adaptive. They have a m.site, m.justfly.com, and they're just thinking about, well, let's just take that that original website, and then let's just swap it in, right, with the new code. I don't think you necessarily have to make your domain kind of the PWA, because that's kind of emulating native apps. So if you create a progressive web app where your goal is just simply to be a replacement for your native app, maybe that will work. There's a company called Custom Ink, which is thinking, well, our website does a lot of different things, right? Like a progressive web app at our domain level might not actually make any sense. So what if we make a progressive web app for like a /design, /design, so that one of the applications under our custom ink umbrella is the design tool, or the tool you
Right.
use to actually customize and create, apparel, mugs, or things like that. And that can be a standalone experience. So depending on how you actually do your URL structure, that may actually work out well. So you don't have to choose whether it's domain or anything like that. The cool thing is you can scope a at home screen or your service worker to an origin, a subdomain, a specific path on the site. It's really up to you and how you want to design that. Again.
Yeah, we've been talking about it as maybe, I don't know if you guys use the same word, but as a hybrid experience. And so it's bringing in progressive web apps as parts of the experience that are going to most benefit from them, but not necessarily needing to do it with everything. Is that a good way to describe it, or is that
Yeah,
not?
like again, think about user first, right? Like what's the actual end-to-end encapsulated journey? And that
Yeah.
potential journey is essentially probably a really good one to test for a progressive web app. Like don't build a progressive web app for your like don't have like a search results progressive web app and then like an item page progressive web app and then like a checkout progressive web app, because
Right.
that's one journey, right? So that's like you wouldn't build 3 different native apps punting users from one to another. Same thing, you wouldn't do that here. But maybe
Yep.
you can have, you keep your blog, your content separate from your actual, checkout and item browsing, and that might actually work out well because they're 2 different user journeys.
Yeah. Maybe one question that definitely came up with us, and I imagine I don't see it asked yet, but I'm going to go ahead and ask it, is where does Apple fit into all of this? And I know that they're still kind of coming around on the idea. When I use Chrome on my phone, it seems like I have a good experience on an iPhone. The experience on an Android phone is great as well, but it does require them to is it change some stuff in their browsers or enable some stuff on their phones? What needs
Yeah,
to
the
happen?
cool thing is, I mean, there are some things that aren't supported on an iOS device to this date, right? So quick refresher, all browsers on iPhones are really just, WebKit.
Yep.
So push notifications right now isn't supported, but service workers are. So you can still have that reliable experience, the offline first experience, which is actually the most important piece about creating engaging experiences while users are there, even if you're on an iPhone, right? So you can go to mobile.twitter.com, for example, and that experience works great regardless of which device you actually use. And that's probably the hardest part, right? Creating that performant experience with that good design, etc. We're working with Apple to figure out what are the existing gaps. They're actually pretty open to it. What they want to hear, though, isn't from Google, obviously. They want to hear from you guys, right? The actual
Right.
companies, developers doing this. So their ask is, if there are things that are missing, things you want them to prioritize more, go file a bug at their WebKit repository. And just the more you can kind of file, the more likely it's going to get to the platform, because I think that's
Absolutely.
going to be the easiest way. They
Yeah,
care about their users. They care about their developers too.
that's great. Let's see. So we have one other question here. This is definitely a question for you. Do you think WebAssembly will replace PWA?
I don't think they're necessarily like independent of each other, right? I think in many ways they're different ways of achieving the same thing, right? So we have an example of like Autodesk, or even not Photoshop, yeah, Autodesk, which is traditionally like a desktop application for creating 3D models. We work with them to basically take their low-level C code essentially and convert that to WebAssembly so that can run inside the browser. But that's the whole point of a progressive web app, right? And in many ways, if you have a wrapper around that, you can still install that WebAssembly experience like a progressive web app. So I don't think they're actually conflicting in any way. It's actually even more reason to say you can still create those super engaging experiences on the web. Just have to find the right technology to get the performance you actually want from it. And so I know some company that I'm working with are thinking about, well, right now some of the web AR capabilities might not actually be there, but if we had libraries to do the calculations, like we have C libraries to do the calculations for taking an image feed and like recognizing the my hand, for example, could we use WebAssembly and create a PWA around that so that I can map like rings or something to my hand, right? And that's something that's definitely possible if you use something like WebAssembly. It's just different tools for the job.
Interesting. Okay. I guess just with a couple minutes left here, maybe last question is if someone wanted to get started evaluating PWA or just kind of building modern web experiences for their company, where would you suggest they start?
Like a resource, or you mean like what part of the application to tackle?
Maybe yeah, maybe what part is it? Like how do you evaluate if you're if you had to, I don't know, if you were asking yourself questions like, does my experience require push
Yeah.
notifications? Does it, things like that
I think
that might get them started.
it goes back to the Starbucks example of nailing the basics. We get too caught up in the at the home screen, the push notifications, right? But the common baseline of all these progressive web apps that I've referenced that you might find online is that a lot of times they fix performance first. They make sure that every single you might not load fast from day one, but if you're on the site already, every single interaction needs to respond to your user input, and that's basically writing efficient code, stripping down the things you don't need, making sure you don't shoot yourself in the foot. Because if you don't have a good foundation, like if you think about building a progressive app as upgrading your site for your house from like a single, one floor home to like a two-story home, right? You still need that good foundation, and so you need to make sure the foundation is deep enough for you to actually build all these features on top of it. I think there are different ways of getting there. Some people find it more easy to, instead of renovating the house where they're living in it, build a proof of concept kind of separate, right?
Yeah.
That's redesign that. Maybe they have a legacy site where, again, every single page looks different because every single page was sent to a different agency at different points in time. Different teams have worked on it, and so it just feels disjoint. Well, I think one of the things that set native development apart from website development a lot of times is they had the advantage of saying, well, we had 3 developers and they were tasked with building this end-to-end experience. And therefore, that experience is consistent, right? It's easy to move from point A to point B. Maybe the right way to approach it from a web standpoint is to think about, well, let's scope everything down. Let's find that minimum user journey that we can maybe test this concept on, right? So again, for custom ink, it was just that design tool, right? Don't reinvent the whole site from day one. And then let's just build that with a user-first mindset.
Yeah, that's great. I think well, I guess we're at time here. The final thing I'll throw in is that if for companies that do need help, we're happy to offer an evaluation too, just to help you think about where you should focus. And then the team here has offered up a 6-week proof of concept as a kind of the 3 sprint thing that can help companies take a slice of what they're doing and get it up, get it stood up a little bit faster and evaluate how it works. So. Cheney, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Pleasure as always. And thank you everyone else for tuning in today. We'll send a follow-up email with some links in it. This video will also be posted for you to review if necessary, or if you'd like to. And thank you again. Appreciate it.
All right. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye.